G'day people, I'm Sharyn. Welcome to my channel. I've been very busy today. I've been making lots and lots of tape and binding in order to do some more work on my fully reversible Quilt As You Go quilt. A few weeks ago I got the main part of the quilt done, but I need to put a border on it and bind it so that I can get it finished and off my to-do list. Today I'm working on that. I may not get it all finished today, but I'll get started. I decided that I'm going to put a border around on this side that is this speckled blue. The join between them, between the body of the quilt and the border, is going to be like this, a 1 inch wide piece of tape. That means that on the back, I've got to decide what to do there. And the decision there, cream, will be the border. And I will use cream as the tape. And after that, I will bind the quilt. I needed to work out how wide I needed to cut the border fabric. There will be a 1/2 inch of it that will be covered by that tape that's joining it to the main body of the quilt. I then figured that since I've got tape over the quilt that's 1 inch wide, I will make a 1 inch visible border, and then I will do the binding, and the binding will use up 1/4 inch. So I need a 1/2 inch plus 1 inch plus 1/4 inch, so 3/4 inch. That's the size that I am going to cut my fabric to in order to make my borders. I need 1 3/4 inches wide of the speckled fabric and the cream fabric for each of the 4 sides of the quilt. So I've got to stitch them together with the wadding in between, ready to apply to the quilt. Another thing I need to do is stitch a line of stitching all the way around the quilt that is just slightly less than a 1/2 inch from the edge, so that I know when I'm putting my tape down where to put it. This is how I adjust my needle so that I can get the just under a 1/2 inch allowance that I want from the edge of the fabric. I've put this ruler next to the edge of the foot, and I'll drop the foot on it. Make sure I don't drop the needle on it because I'll break my needle. And now what I'm doing is I'm on a straight stitch, perfectly happy with the straight stitch, but I've got to make sure the needle is where it needs to come down. On a straight stitch, if you use the key that would normally be for width on a zigzag and you move it, the needle will move. I want this needle to be coming down just a little bit to the right of the 1/2 inch line. And I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going to just hand wind that down and make sure I'm a little bit to the left, wind it back up out of the way. That's perfect. And that means that now when I go sewing, I can have the edge of the fabric against the edge of the foot, as in just running it along there, and I will get the straight stitch will be coming down in the right place for me. Now when I start to sew, I just need to keep the edge of the quilt right at the edge of that foot. Because this is a full-sized quilt, it's pretty heavy and the quilt's trying to move out of the way, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stitch down all 4 sides. I'm not going to try and pivot at the corners. Just sew off the end, go on to the next one and start again. When you're doing this with a full-size quilt, the full-size quilt will want to pull off the side of your table. If you're close to the edge, maybe put a ironing board or something to hold the quilt up so it's not trying to pull against you so much. I'm just coming back to the beginning now, so you can see where the first row of stitching was that I did. The other good thing about doing that is that these edges are biased So by putting that stitching on there, I should stabilise it somewhat. I'm now making a border. I've got my cream fabric, 1 3/4 inches underneath. I've got my wadding, which I've cut a bit wide. I'll trim that off afterwards. And then I've got my top, or the splatter fabric on top. I've still got my needle adjusted as it was when I was going around the outside of the quilt. And all I'm doing is exactly the same, keeping the edge of the border next to the edge of the foot. I've got this side of the border fabric with a 1/2 inch or just under 1/2 inch row of stitching from the edge. This side I need to make it smaller. I need it to be so that I can add my binding fabric and this line of stitching won't show. What I'm going to do, without moving the needle, I could move the needle if I like, the cream fabric is underneath, that should be pretty much matching the splatter blue. So I'm just going to sew along here, pretty much keeping this edge of the fabric in there, and then I will trim off the edge of the batting. And you can see there it's catching the cream fabric underneath quite nicely, and I'll just make my 4 pieces of border fabric exactly like this with the border fabric stitched on either side. I'm just going to trim off the excess batting. Where am I now? I've got my 4 pieces of border fabric. They've got a 1/2 inch or just under 1/2 inch stitching on one side. That will give me a guide for putting the tape down. The other side has been stitched down, so that's where the binding is going to go. They're currently too long, and I will work out next time exactly how long I need them to be. I've got a large amount of fabric ready for my taping and for my binding, and I have put a stay stitch around the edge, which is also going to help me to know where to put my tape. I'm really getting towards the end of this quilt now. I need to butt those borders on, zigzag over the join, apply the tape, and then bind it. It won't be long now. If you want to know how I got to this point with the quilt, check out the playlist about the reversible quilt. See you next time.